All righty. Let me just open up the slideshow here. One moment. I have to share my screen here. All right. So welcome everybody to our April meeting. As always, we have a few announcements before getting started. And let me just make sure that I have. Let me make sure that I have my audio. I'm not sure that we'll need the. Yeah, I don't think we'll need the microphones because we have the speaker. All righty. So as I was mentioning, we have a few announcements. Not a lot of stuff coming up, but there's still a few things. On May 20th to the 22nd is going to be the FNPS annual conference. It is going to be virtual. It's a full weekend of presentations. There's going to be a silent auction, many different ways to kind of learn about what the latest research in native plants is. On May 24th, we're going to have our May program. We're going to have Barbara McAdam from UF IFAS Extension talking about creating rain gardens, bioswales, and ponds. Soak up the rain in your garden. That's going to be kind of an extension of our last month's presentation, the one about our issues with water that was presented by Dalton Goolsby, also from UF IFAS Extension. The idea is still to have a hybrid meeting, so have the in-person aspect as well as having the YouTube live stream. Although of course that's all dependent on how this pandemic wants to behave in the next month. We do have a field trip that was just finalized this morning, and that is going to be on Sunday, May 15th. Steve Woodmansey is going to be leading a field trip at County Line Scrub. If you haven't gone to County Line Scrub, it's a very neat place. It's our last little pocket of scrub habitat here in Miami-Dade County. There's a few kinds of plants in there that you can't really find anywhere else in the county. So I highly recommend that field trip. It's our county line, of course. It's a great question. Is it? It's a neat place. I highly recommend checking it out. And it's otherwise closed. The gate is currently closed, so it's kind of a unique opportunity to get to see it. I'd also like to welcome new members. Do we have any new members in the room? All right, no one present, but I'd like to welcome Grant Bennett, Jessica Rosenberg, Lindsay Thomas, Kate Tom, Kristen Bowen, and Ashley Atkins. Welcome to the chapter, everyone. I'd also like to thank everyone who donated plants. Of course, the raffle table is a major way that we get funds to do what we do, to continue spreading the message about native plants and to do the work we do to help protect them. So if you brought our native plants, thank you kindly. If you're not a member and you're interested in receiving the main newsletter, in the back of the room we have a sign-in sheet, so you can receive it even if you aren't a member. And the last thing I'll say is just for a bit of housekeeping. If you have a cell phone, please kindly turn it to vibrate or to silent, just so that we don't have any background noise during the presentation. Of course, as always, you can always check out what we're doing at our different social media. We have Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and our Twitter, which, funny enough, is now under new management. All right. So if you, for anyone attending this meeting through YouTube, we're just going to present our raffle table plans quickly. So please stand by for a few minutes, and we'll get started with the presentation momentarily. All right. So usually Steve's the one who's here to present the plants, but I'll give a quick rundown. I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable as Steve is, but I'll try and hold my own. First, we have a necklace pod, usually a coastal plant. It's in the legume family, so it has these nice bright yellow flowers. Pollinators like them, and I recently learned that there's a species of moth that likes to eat them. And moths are often overlooked, but they are important food sources, especially for things like bats. You know, nocturnal insects, nocturnal mammals, they go hand in hand. Cocoa plum is a pretty common shrub that people use in landscaping. You also find it pretty often in natural areas, particularly in coastal habitats and also in freshwater wetlands. There's different varieties of cocoa plum. I believe this one might be the green tip, which is a freshwater variety, but it'll do well with drier soils as well. We have a couple of pots that have a mix of things. The main plant here is, or the largest one, maybe not main, depending on your perspective. But this is a firebush. One, in my opinion, is a must-have for any native garden. The flowers are a butterfly magnet. There are these red tubular flowers that things like zebra longwings, gold fritillaries, giant swallowtails, they very much like the nectar of these plants. In this one, we also have a Spanish stopper, there's a Virginia creeper, and which a lot of people don't want, and a wild coffee. And then in this one, we have a kunti growing here, and also a Jamaica caper. So it's kind of get more bang for your buck with these. Here we have a scorpion's tail, also a pretty good nectar plant. It's in the borage family, whose nectar is important for certain butterflies' life cycle. The chemicals in it aid a few species of butterflies to make pheromones, so important to for the mating process of those species. It can start popping up all over your yard. I put one once in my yard in one little corner. Now I see it coming up everywhere. But it's a very good nectar plant. Here we have varnish leaf. I don't personally know a lot about varnish leaf. I know it's a coastal plant. It's not all that common. If you want a really nice example of one, there's one right in front of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center at Crandon Park. The seeds of this plant are interesting. They're kind of in these papery, kind of like sacs almost, that have these wings on them. So it seems that they're wind dispersed. Here we have Tetrazygia, otherwise known as West Indian lilac. If we have any Jurassic Park fans, West Indian lilac is mentioned in that movie.
But they used
the wrong plant for that, but they did mention it. I don't think that their team was assessing scientific. Do you know if that one has the same common name? The one that they use in the movie?
It was blue porterweed.
Blue porter.
The non-native blue porterweed with some berries hung from it.
This is the one that they wanted to mention. West Indian lilac or Tetrazygia. It's state threatened, and it's usually a pine rockland plant, where in a well-maintained pine rockland, it's usually maintained as a low shrub. In a pine rockland that doesn't have fire, it can become a small to medium-sized tree over the years. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buckets of Spanish moss. Spanish moss is a tillandsia. Our logo is also tillandsia, just a different species. Ours is Tillandsia fasciculata. This one is Tillandsia usneoides, if I'm not mistaken. Great tree for oaks, mahoganies, large satin leaves if you have those. I kind of like them for this kind of, for oaks, they kind of, in my opinion, give them this kind of ancient appearance, when you have an oak filled with Spanish moss. So there's a lot of it. This one, we're not entirely sure. Gwen, I don't know if you might have an idea.
All I can get it to, I'm pretty sure it's a crotalaria.
I'm thinking so too. Marty, do you know?
Crotalaria, but which one?
I'm not sure. I was thinking low rattlebox, rabbit bells, but I'm not sure. Crotalaria, everyone. It has leaves of 3.
Right, yeah, so it's
Low rattlebox. Okay, there is. Okay, so low rattlebox is a common plant in pine rocklands. It attracts the crotalaria moth, which is very pretty. It's bright white and has pink on its wings too. So when it's flying around, you can very visibly see that pink. So if you're trying to attract that kind of moth, you want this plant in your yard. We have a couple of privet sennas, one of our native sennas. Best thing about this plant is that it attracts several species of sulfur butterfly, which are some of our brightest colored species. It does also have a symbiotic relationship with ants. They have these nectaries at the base of the compound leaves that produce a sugary liquid that the ants like to eat. In return, they give defense to the plant, and that defense often results in the caterpillars being eaten. But it's the circle of life, I suppose. This is one of my favorite plants, just for the butterflies that it brings. Before I planted this at home, I never saw sulfurs, and now that I have it, I see them pretty regularly. Here we have pineland privet. So this is one of our 2 varieties of privet. The pineland one is supposed to grow a bit smaller than the other one, which can grow to be a pretty large shrub or small tree. This plant makes a great hedge. The flowers are pretty sought after by pollinators, and the fruits are pretty sought after by birds. We have a Boston fern, which is one of our native sword ferns. This one is tricky for me because I often, if I see a sword fern in the field, I still haven't yet learned how to identify the invasives from the native ones. I do know that these sword ferns make excellent ground cover. So if you put one in a corner of your yard, it's bound to send underground rhizomes all over the place, and you'll get it everywhere. So if you have an area in your yard, or if you have a particularly shady area in your yard and you're looking to fill out some of the space, this is a great one.
This is also our smaller of the Boston ferns. It tops out at about 18 inches, no taller.
Mhm.
So it's got a smaller stature than some of the others. It's about the same size as the invasive Nephrolepis cordifolia, but this one isn't anywhere near as invasive as that one.
Okay.
But it does grow, so
Yeah.
it's going to spread.
That's what makes it confusing for me. It's all the same size. They all look a little bit alike, but it's a pretty neat plant. We don't see this coming up here very often. Now, wild lime is one of those, love-hate plants. People hate them for the spines, and I have one at home that I try and maintain pretty low. I don't want it getting too much higher than our fence, but every time I trim it, I always get a few cuts on me. The main reason why you'd want this in your yard is to attract the giant swallowtail butterfly, North America's largest species of butterfly. This is one of its host plants. If you do put it in your yard, I recommend putting it somewhere that's inconspicuous, that people are going to walk by regularly, either in the corner or just somewhere where people might not walk through. And then we have here another necklace pond. So this one, I'll move over to there. All right, so that's our lineup for today. Thank you very much. All right, so let's get on to the main show. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker is Sarah Steele Cabrera. So Sarah is a graduate research assistant and PhD student in the School of Natural Resources and Environment at the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera and Biodiversity, Florida Museum of Natural History, University of Florida. She grew up in Rhode Island by oak forests and freshwater swamps. She earned her bachelor's in biology and environmental science from Brandeis University in 2013 and an MS in entomology from the University of Florida in 2020. She has spent the past 6 years researching rare and endangered butterflies in the Florida Keys, but has also conducted biological fieldwork in Costa Rica, Massachusetts, St. Croix, New Mexico, and throughout Florida. So Sarah, if you give me 15 seconds, I'll give you the thumbs up and you can go ahead.
Sounds good.
All right, go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
All right. All right, I just raised the volume a bit. Go
Okay.
ahead.
How about now?
There we go.
Okay. Yeah,
Is that good
better.
for everyone? Yeah, I think the internet connection might be a little choppy, but
Give me one.
yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay, it's okay. Sorry, you know,
Yeah.
Cox internet. Okay, so I'm good to go ahead and start.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. And thank you, everyone, for having me here and for hosting me this evening, especially from a distance. I hope the technology works in our favor this evening. So just from the start, I know this is a native plant society, so I have put in a little bit more information about plants. Of course, this talk is mainly about the Miami blue butterfly, but of course, when one studies insects, especially butterflies, you unavoidably study plants as well, though I am no botanist. And just one more note, if you've seen me talk recently at other events around South Florida, this is going to be some of the same data with a little bit of more of a plant twist. So with that, my talk this evening is conservation of the Miami blue butterfly in the Florida Keys. So first off, I know that many of you know this already, but I gotta include it in here. The question I get so often, why should we care about insects? And as you all well know, they are pollinators, both of our food crops, as well as in natural habitats. They are decomposers of waste, predators of plant pests like this ladybug here eating these aphids. They're foundational in our food webs. You know, even folks who don't like insects, you know, if I tell them, if you like birds, you need to have insects there to feed them. Additionally, insects make up the majority of all life, animal life on Earth. And I think they are rather beautiful. So not only would life as we know it not be possible on this planet, but I think they bring us a great deal of beauty and joy. Though some folks might disagree, especially as it is love bug season here in North Florida. So first off, you may have heard some talk about the media will sometimes call it the insect apocalypse or insectageddon. And there's debate going on in the scientific world about, you know, how big are insect declines? Where is it happening? Where is it not happening? And I will just say that insect numbers are declining. This is true. So this slide here is a figure I took from a paper published a couple of years ago, looking at butterfly abundance over just over 2 decades in Ohio. So you can see here, these dots are the butterflies counted per minute. And I believe this is from NABA Group's North American Butterfly Association group counts going back to the 90s. And over time, these numbers have decreased at about a rate of 2% per year, which might not sound like a ton, but over 21 years, that is a reduction of about a third. So this is something that is real and something that is occurring. And a lot of our insect conservation strategies rely really heavily on plants. The majority of insects eat plants at one or more stages of their lives. So plants, the habitat these insects live in, are incredibly important. You know, the most important and best insect conservation strategies are, of course, not developing habitat in the first place, conserving it, as well as habitat restoration, which in Florida often is burning, right? Most of our habitats here in Florida are fire dependent. So I just put these few pictures from different points in time. This is of a pine forest in Southwest Florida. You know, the habitat really changes if you restore it, in this case with fire. And that plant community directly impacts the insect community. Today, I will be mainly talking about captive propagation, as well as reintroductions and translocations. And so these are really hands-on conservation techniques, and I would call them conservation strategies of last resort. You know, the first thing ought to be not developing the habitat, restoring habitat, but when things reach such a level of endangerment, like the Miami blue, we are forced to use more hands-on techniques. So to introduce you all to the Miami blue butterfly, it has a rather long scientific name, Cyclargus thomasi bethunebakeri. You'll notice that it has 3 Latin words. That bethunebakeri means it's a subspecies. There are other related butterflies found in the Caribbean as well as the Bahamas, but this subspecies bethunebakeri is unique, endemic to South Florida. It's a very small butterfly. I often tell people that it is smaller than the size of your thumbnail, and it was once common throughout much of Florida. So that's coastal Florida, so both the Atlantic and Gulf coasts. Especially common in South Florida, was first found and named in Miami, hence the name, but was found all the way up through Central Florida historically. And now it is only found on a few islands in the Keys. So that's 2 wildlife refuges in the Keys, and is no longer found anywhere else where it once was. So you may say, I've seen some little blue butterflies around. Well, they can actually be pretty tricky to ID because they are so small and don't often like to land. There are a few species of blue butterflies in South Florida. And so I like to walk folks through how to identify some of these little blue butterflies, and have you guys keep an eye out for them when you're in your yards or out on a walk. So of course we have our Miami blue butterfly, which is the endangered butterfly. And the thing that sets this butterfly apart from most of the others, especially the common butterflies in South Florida, is mainly this white band here that you'll see on the hind wing. Sometimes Serranus blue can have them, but not as distinct. Additionally, you'll notice, if you can see in the photo, it has 2 spots that have this iridescent blue, whereas Serranus blue really just has the one, maybe just a little bit of iridescence in a second spot, but mainly just the Miami blue has 2 pretty large spots like that on the end of its hind wing. The most common blue butterflies, so that's a subfamily of butterflies you'll see in South Florida, are the Serranus blue and the Cassius blue. You also will see the Eastern pygmy blue, which is one of, I believe it's the smallest butterfly, well, vies with the Western pygmy blue for the smallest butterfly in North America. Additionally, there is sort of some questions about this 5th one here, the nickerbean blue. There was a time back in the mid-2000s where there was a population of the nickerbean blue in the Keys. It has not been cited for a number of years. I've never personally seen one, despite having lived and worked quite a bit in the Keys, although it is common in Cuba and other parts of the Caribbean. But the thing that makes it easy to identify is this really elongated orange spot here that you'll see. The Miami blue has an orange spot on its hind wing as well, but it is much, much smaller. The same with the Serranus and Cassius blues. So that is a brief guide on how to tell our little blue butterfly friends apart here in South Florida. And so the Miami blue has at least 3 different host plants. First is Keys blackbead and gray nickerbean. So those are both Fabaceae. And then interestingly, it has a 3rd host plant that's not related closely at all, balloon vine, which is in a completely different family. And I'll talk a little bit more about these 3 plants at the end. But just keep that in your head that these are the 3 larval host plants. Keys blackbead is mainly what we find out in the extant habitat in the islands where this butterfly currently lives. But at different points in time, it has and can still utilize all three of these host plants. And that's host plants both where the female butterflies lay eggs and what the caterpillars eat as they grow. And then I just have a brief video here, just sharing some of the fun things about this butterfly. During your plant raffle, you guys were talking about mutualistic relationships with ants. Well, the Miami blue also has a mutualistic relationship with ants. So I'll just click play here.
The Miami blue butterfly is considered one of the rarest insects in North America. The caterpillar of this butterfly can be found in many different color forms, ranging from bright green to dark red. This caterpillar has a peculiar relationship with an unexpected organism, ants. The Miami blue caterpillars have evolved special organs to produce a sugary liquid from a small slit on their back called the dorsal nectary organ. The combination of this sugary liquid and dispersing chemical signals sent out by the caterpillars works to appease these otherwise vicious ants. These ants will drum their antennae on the backs of the caterpillars, which is a signal for the caterpillar to secrete this substance full of carbohydrates and amino acids. Butterfly larvae have a wide range of different predators, including ambush-style predators that hunt these caterpillars. Carpenter ants act as bodyguards for the caterpillars and will viciously attack any potential predators. While the ants are receiving a nutritious snack from these caterpillars, the caterpillars are receiving protection against insect predators. Just by having these ants around, the caterpillar's survival rate increases significantly. Native to Florida, the Miami blue can only be found in the Florida Keys today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you're able to see it. I'll make sure the link to that video gets sent out after the talk. I always have to include it just because it is so cool. You know, all of the different kinds of relationships between plants and insects and other animals, I just find so fascinating. So as I said before, and as I think it's in the video, the Miami blue is once common. So these are its historic range in red. And now it is only found on a few islands within this box, obviously a much smaller range. And this is due in part mainly to humans, of course, and our development along the coasts. So these two photos show the same section of Miami Beach, first in 1925, just around that first wave of development in South Florida. And here is that same stretch of beach in 2018. This butterfly really started declining drastically in the 1970s. And today, Florida has about, probably more at this point, has about 3 times the population than it did in the 1970s. So here is what the current range of this butterfly looks like. This is an aerial view of Key West National Wildlife Refuge. It is beautiful, and I have been very fortunate to get to spend quite a lot of time here. And while they are beautiful islands and the butterfly seems to be doing okay here, the fact that it is only found on a few islands makes it extremely vulnerable to extinction. First off, because its range is so small, it would just take one catastrophic event, such as a hurricane or a bad drought or something of the like, to really wipe it completely off the map. Additionally, the maximum elevation of these islands is only about 1.5 meters above sea level. So it is really important that we get this butterfly to inhabit places with other places within its historic range if it's not going to go extinct completely. So therefore, we brought this butterfly, started a captive breeding program here at the University of Florida in Gainesville. We started this back in 2016, and it's still going today. And this is a view of my lab mates Matt and Kristen, and as well as a volunteer working in the lab in Gainesville, Florida, and they're tending to larvae. And you can actually see some of this in action if you visit Gainesville and visit the Florida Museum of Natural History. This is a window out to the public part of the museum. You know, if you've been up here, if you go all the way to the back of the museum, you'll see some large windows into lab. So we are working on this project in one of those laboratories that's partially on public display. And so the project I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes on reintroductions of this butterfly was done as a part of my master's research. So finished this project in 2019, 2020, and still working on getting it published. And because I'm now a PhD student, so I've been sort of working on other projects as well. But we had 2 field sites, and so that was Bahia Honda State Park and Long Key State Park, if you're familiar with the area. So just for folks who maybe haven't spent as much time in the Keys, this here toward the bottom is Key West, and here is Key West National Wildlife Refuge, where that butterfly is present in the wild. And so these islands are just a few dozen miles up the chain of islands. We picked these islands because Bahia Honda State Park had wild butterflies, Miami blue butterflies, up until 2010. So it was sort of the logical first place to put it back. Additionally, both of these state parks have quite large populations of the Miami blues host plants and are, of course, conservation lands that won't be developed. And so when we were doing these reintroductions, we actually put them in enclosures. And you'll see this is our lab technician, Taylor Hunt, standing in front of one of these enclosures, which is just a big mesh cage we put on the beach. And the reason we did this was just to be able to keep track of the butterfly. We tried a pilot study where we just released butterflies into the wild. And the problem with that was that once we released butterflies, we were very rarely able to cite the butterflies again or find them again, which made it really hard to collect data. So by sort of enclosing them in these cages, we could collect a lot more data on what they were doing. And I'll note that we placed these cages directly over existing habitats. So each of these enclosures had host plants, as well as nectar plants, leaf litter, everything that to at least human eyes, everything that a Miami blue butterfly would need to be happy. And so my question in this master's project was, how does life stage at release affect the success of reintroduced butterflies? So as you might remember, butterflies go through 4 life stages: egg, caterpillar, pupa, or sometimes called a chrysalis, and then adult butterflies. And so in this experiment, we tested 2 life stages, namely pupae and adults, to see if that made a difference in the success of the reintroduction. And by success, what we measured was fecundity, or how many eggs the released butterflies laid, as well as how long the butterflies lived after release. And the reason we picked pupae and adults were because we tried in a pilot study, we tried caterpillars, and they just did not survive very well. And so we were left and the eggs are very tiny and difficult and hard to transport. So that's why we focused on these 2 life stages here, pupae and adults. And now, what do those look like? So this is an adult Miami blue butterfly on the left. And you'll notice it has this green dot that you may be able to see. And that is not a marking that this butterfly normally has. That's actually something we applied. We marked the butterflies that we released to differentiate them from those that were born on site. And that is just with a green Sharpie. One of the best ways of marking a butterfly is just with marker. It's actually very easy. And then on the right here, this is a pupa, and we put them in little PVC tubes, partially to protect them from predators, but also so that we could see what happened later. We could come back and see, oh, did that butterfly survive and emerge, or did it not? And so they're very tiny. And here is what that looks like sort of in a macro. In macro, you can see, if you look closely, you can see the eye, the antennae, and the wings forming here. But they are very small, which is why we put them in these tubes. And so we put butterflies in these cages. We counted the butterflies. And we also counted their eggs. And that's what their eggs look like. Once again, a macro photograph here of the eggs, which are very beautiful. They have really fascinating patterns on them, but very small. If you can see in this photo, this thing here is actually the scale of a Miami blue butterfly, like the scales that butterflies have on their wings. If that gives you an idea of their size, the eggs are only really about the size of maybe a very small pinhead. And that's what they look like on the plant. That is my thumb. And I've circled a couple of the Miami blue butterfly eggs there in yellow. So very small, but at least they are a different color than the plants they are laid on. Oops. So as a conservation project, we had some good success. We had short-term reestablishment of this butterfly at Bahia Honda State Park, which some of you may have heard about a couple of years ago. The butterflies persisted for about 6 generations on their own, without us as scientists doing anything, which is great. The only issue there is that 6 generations, even though that sounds like quite a long time, because the Miami blues are such short-lived butterflies, 6 generations is only about 6 months. Unfortunately, the reintroduced butterflies did not make it through the dry season. 2019 was it was a pretty dry, wet season. And so we think that they just didn't quite have enough going into that dry season to make it through to the following wet season. But we are continuing this work. So yes, this experiment serves as proof of concept that this can work for this butterfly. And we had much more success at Bahia Honda than we did at Long Key. We think this is partially because of nickerbean, which I'll talk about in a minute. Some of you may be familiar with this plant. I know earlier at the opening meeting, Brian talked about wild lime as a love-hate plant. Nickerbean is another one of those love-hate plants. It's a great native plant, and really seen the butterflies had greater success in areas with nickerbean versus areas with blackbead. However, it is, of course, a pretty mean, spiny plant. And interestingly, we had the pupae were about as successful as the adult butterflies, which was something that surprised me personally, because of course, if you put out pupae, not all of those butterflies in those pupae, in those chrysalis, survived to adulthood. So a few of them did get predated, and some of them just didn't quite emerge correctly. As many of you, if you've raised your own butterflies, sometimes you'll see that butterflies will sometimes die while they're trying to get out of that chrysalis. Sometimes they'll come out with crinkled wings, things happen. So despite that extra source of mortality with the pupae, they were just about as successful as adult butterflies, which is really great because pupae are also the easiest life stage to release. As part of this project, we developed some new release tubes, so bigger PVC pipes that were actually hanging from shrubs in the habitat, and that with using fishing line, which helps them avoid predation by ants, because the ants have a lot of trouble getting on that very thin fishing line, and also keeps them a little bit cooler, sort of exposed to the breeze and the shade of the shrubs. So this is work that we are continuing. Even though this experiment is over, we are looking to restore populations of this butterfly with the eventual goal of having it make it back to the mainland. And so one thing we've done recently is we've worked with the wonderful botanists at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, as well as folks at Zoo Miami, to do a habitat evaluation for much of Florida for this butterfly. So specifically, Lydia, Tiffany, and Jen Posley, Lydia Cooney, Tiffany, I can't remember Tiffany's last name, Tiffany Moore, and Jen Posley, who many of you may know, were really great in evaluating many of these sites for plants. And then we followed up looking at some of the habitats. So we are currently working with them on sort of a prioritized list of places where this butterfly could be reintroduced in the future. And now have a captive colony going strong again. And so we're hopeful to be able to do more large scale reintroductions this year, and into the future as well. So since this is a native plant society, I do want to make sure I get to the plant aspects of this. As I talked before, these are the 3 larval host plants for the Miami blue. But even if, in your you're unlike butterfly, host plants are beneficial for a number of other insects. So specifically, Keyes blackbead is also the larval host plant for sulfur. Attract all sorts of pollinators. It blooms often in about January, March. Flowers are really beautiful and fragrant. As I mentioned before, gray nickerbean is a love hate plant. It can be really good in your landscape if you are looking to keep people out. I know somebody who plants this window underneath their tween daughter's window, so that is one possible use. But it does work really effectively as a screen if you want to keep somebody out of someplace. And then the 3rd host plant here, balloon vine, is also the host plant for the silver banded hairstreak. And some of the Miami blue butterfly's favorite nectar plants are really great nectar plants for lots and lots of butterflies and other insects. So the Miami blue's most favorite nectar plants in the habitats where it's found, so on beaches, are snow square stem, scorpion tail heliotrope, as well as Spanish needle and buttonweed. And so you'll notice that all these nectar plants are really pretty weedy. And these are excellent excellent nectar plants for lots and lots of insects, not just the Miami blue. And the great part is they're so easy to grow. I do note that some of the spermacosi in Florida are non-native, some are native. It's one of those weeds that is sort of ubiquitous. Bidens alba is also a host plant for the dainty sulfur, but these are really great plants that are incredibly low in upkeep and are really great for all sorts of insects. And so this leads me to the case for lazy gardening. Lots and lots of insects, including the Miami blue, love just sort of weedy spots. This is actually a picture I took just this afternoon as I was looking through my slides for this presentation. I was sitting drinking a coffee in downtown Gainesville and sort of looked over and saw this overgrown kind of abandoned raised bed that probably once had herbs. You can see this is maybe a pineapple, some cacti, and it kind of got abandoned and it grew up into just bidens. And that is really great habitat. So, even if you don't have a big yard or have a lot of time to dedicate to gardening all year round, even just taking a corner of your yard, or even so much as just a couple of planters and sort of letting it grow up into Spanish needles is really, really great for pollinators as well as other insects. I know it's not everybody's most favorite plant, given the seeds that stick to everything, but the birds really like those seeds too. And so finally here, you folks as a native plant society are probably doing a lot of these things. I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here. Landscaping with native plants is really one of the best things we can all do to help insects. Of course, reducing pesticide use. A big issue with insects that fly at night and pollinate at night, such as moths, is light pollution. And I actually just read a study that plants like shrubs and trees can actually be really effective sort of protection against light pollution in your yard. So even if you live in a city with where you have lots of light pollution and street lights, or maybe your neighbor keeps their floodlights on all night long, planting a screen with some shrubs and trees can provide just a little bit more darkness that insects can utilize, sort of like if you had shade, right? It almost shades them from that light pollution. So that's a thing I never thought about, a great benefit of planting in your landscape. Additionally, educating others about the importance of insects. Of course, as members of the Florida Native Plant Society, you all are quite aware of the importance of native plants. And so thinking a little bit about some of the insects that those native plants benefit and teaching others, showing other people that bugs aren't all gross. And I included a link here, which will get sent out later. So this has some resources about all of these things, as well as other things to help protect insects in your landscape. And then finally, just before we end here, we created a few other educational materials for the Miami blue butterfly, including this coloring book. I'll make sure the link to the PDF is sent out to y'all. We have it both in free printable PDFs in English and Spanish. Additionally, we have it printed in just in English for now. But if you say have a group, school group or other group of folks that you would like to provide physical copies, please get in touch. We may be able to provide some of those to you for free. Additionally, we created an exhibit about this butterfly, both as a physical exhibit that's moved to a few places in South Florida, as well as an online exhibit that covers the same material as the in-person exhibit. And I'll make sure once again that link gets sent out to you all. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening, and also thank my lab mates in the Daniels lab here in Gainesville, as well as the many, many volunteers that have worked on this project over the years, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. I've included as well my contact information, my email. This is the website for Jarrett Daniels lab, the lab I'm in, as well as a couple of Twitter handles. And yeah, so with that, I can go ahead and take questions if there is time.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I think we do have some questions here in the YouTube chat, but let me open it up to the floor first. Does anyone have any questions for Sarah? No? Go ahead.
Well, I missed where they were actually grooming the butterflies before they put them out.
Like where they were raising them?
Yeah, was it in Gainesville?
Yeah. Could you give a word on that, Sarah? So someone asked where they were raising the butterflies.
Yes, that is correct. We do raise the butterflies here in Gainesville, Florida, which I know is a little funny since we're somewhat further north than the native range of this butterfly, and certainly where we're working on it in South Florida. But this is where we have, lab space, and the folks with expertise on raising this butterfly is up here in North Florida. So yes, that's correct.
I had thought that their Miami blues had been on Elliott Key, because I remember there was a large population, they had a lot of nickerbeani divine up there. Are they not there any longer?
Yes, they were. You are correct that they were once on Elliott Key. My understanding is the last time anyone observed them on Elliott was right before Hurricane Andrew in 1992. We have looked for them out there. There is still some nickerbean present, as well as a great deal of blackbead present on that island. They have not been sighted since Hurricane Andrew, to my knowledge. It is an island that we monitor regularly for Strauss's swallowtail. So I would like to think that we would notice if there were Miami blues there. But it's because that population was isolated, by the time Hurricane Andrew came along and gave a really good wallop to that area. That's, was likely the sort of straw that broke the camel's back. I like to emphasize when we talk about hurricanes and endangered butterflies that, of course, all of our native flora and fauna are adapted to hurricanes here in Florida, especially along the coast. But what can happen when something is already pushed to the edge, right, to endangerment, to rarity by human actions like the Miami blue, that hurricane can really be that last straw for the butterfly. So I don't ever like to blame hurricanes. At the end of the day, it's still human activity. But that is my understanding in that case of Elliott Key, was that was the last time Miami blue was spotted there. Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So we currently participate with Your Child Garden and Zoo Miami in the repopulation of the Atala and the residential yards. So did I understand you right, that you would possibly in the future be working with them, the same group for populating the mainland areas of South Florida?
We are working with Fairchild. So with the TALA, I believe you're talking about the Connect to Protect network, that program, which is wonderful and has done so much great work and continues to do so. We are currently working with those botanists on helping us assess habitats around throughout the state, really in the butterfly's historic habitat. It's not something that we're currently involving community scientists in and planting that host plant. I hope, one day if we can get this butterfly to that point, that would be wonderful. This butterfly is just too rare really for that sort of action yet, especially in urban areas, but that would be amazing one day. One day I hope we get there. And certainly Connect to Protect's a great program.
Any more questions? All right, so we do have did you have a? Go ahead. Did you hear that, Sarah?
I can't quite, if you don't mind repeating it.
So Mary's asking if the Miami blue pupates in leaf litter.
Yes. Hi, Mary. Thanks for the question. It's a really good question. And yes, it does pupate in leaf litter. And that was, I think it was maybe a result of my experiment that I sort of glossed over. But one of those results was that Miami blue butterflies did better in areas with lots of leaf litter versus area with more bare ground, likely because of that habitat, that really important habitat for pupation. And the reasons Miami blue, as well as lots of other butterflies and moths and other insects, you'll often find them pupating in leaf litter. Certainly, those of you who do gardening, if you're digging up soil or moving leaves, you'll sometimes find pupae. And the reasons that insects do that are a few. One, it can help them regulate temperature. So in areas up north where it's cold, that helps them avoid some of those harsh temperatures, and it works the same in the heat. If there can be that leaf litter, it stays just a bit cooler in that leaf litter than it does on, say, bare ground, like in a sand on the beaches where we did this work. Additionally, it does help provide some protection from predators. So that leaf litter habitat, most folks probably wouldn't think about habitat, but leaf litter truly is a habitat for the Miami blue as well as other insects. Is really important. You may have heard from native garden groups to leave leaf litter where you can, or at least wait to move leaf litter until things are leafing out, which is once things start raining, which is really great. So that leaf litter is very vital habitat, and the more you can leave natural leaf litter, the better.
Any more from the audience? So Sarah, we have a couple of quick ones just from the YouTube chat.
Yeah, sure.
So one, I remember you had a map of where the introduction sites that you guys are assessing are, but someone wrote that in some of the Indian mounds on the north shore of Everglades National Park, there's a lot of nickerbean, and they were wondering if there were any efforts to reintroduce the Miami blue there.
Not currently. There were reintroduction efforts done in the Flamingo area of Everglades National Park back in the early to mid 90s that I am not old enough to have been involved in. The reason we're not focusing on some of those sites at the moment is just because of access there. Most of those sites are accessible only by boat, so the weather has to really work. And so we're focusing mainly on places that we can access more easily in order to monitor it. Because one of the most important parts about these reintroductions is to use these reintroductions in order to learn more, what works, what doesn't, just like I did in this experiment I talked about this evening. And it's hard to learn as much if you can only get to the site, say, a couple times a month, and it's boat only. It is much easier to learn more quickly if it's a site that can be monitored more regularly. But yeah, great question. And certainly there is some habitat out there in Everglades National Park, as well as lots of other places nickerbean is present.
All right, and I think this might be our last question. But someone's asking, does the mosquito spraying affect the butterflies on the release sites and the keys? But also maybe in general too. Is mosquito spraying a big hindrance?
Yes, so good question. What I will say about mosquito control is that, you know, historically, although we don't have data on this, mosquito control, so that's largely the adulticide, so the spraying that kills adult mosquitoes. Most of those chemicals are toxic to many invertebrates, almost all invertebrates, which includes butterflies. And so especially the chemicals that were used several decades ago, you know, they were really toxic to all life, and certainly is likely to be one reason that this butterfly decreased in population and disappeared from some places. And some of the chemicals we use today to kill adult mosquitoes are still toxic to butterflies and other invertebrates. I would like to note that mosquito control, at least in the Keys, I don't know as much about mosquito control in Dade County, but in the Keys, the focus has become more and more on larvicides. So that's pellets, they're called BT. I'm not going to remember the name of the bacteria. It's embedded in pellets that are dropped from helicopters and dropped into water where mosquitoes breed. And that impacts just mosquitoes and a couple other species of aquatic breeding flies, and does not impact butterflies or other invertebrates at all. So that's certainly one solution, and how mosquito control can be both effective at decreasing the impact of mosquitoes on human populations, as well as on butterflies, pollinators, and all insects. But yes, certainly is still an important issue, mosquito control.
All right, let me just check one more time in the audience. Some more last minute questions. All right, Sarah, I want to give you a big thanks for coming out with this brand new this kind of brand new system we have going on here. Thankfully, it worked out pretty well, and I think one day when we see Miami blues all over the place, we have this work to thank. So it's really incredible to see that you guys are trying to bring this butterfly back from where it currently is. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you guys. Thanks so much for having me this evening. And thanks so much for your dedication and love for native plants. Certainly, we need lots of folks like you out there. So thanks so much.
So to you and to everyone who's joining us on YouTube, I'd like to give you guys a good night, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks y'all. Have a good night.
Bye-bye. You too.